Good afternoon, friends. My name is Liz Wolf. I'm out of the Dallas meeting. I'm glad to finally be here. I got here at lunch. This is our keynote panel speaking to the theme of led by faith to work for justice. So I'm going to be super interested to hear what each of our three panelists has to say. We're going to have them introduce themselves and then speak to you, and we'll do all three panelists, and then we'll open up the floor. For folks who are in the room, as a friendly reminder, Neil will be handing you a mic so that everyone here and online can hear. And if you're in the online space and you want to put questions in the chat, that would be great. And Scott, I think, is helping monitor that. Also, for folks in the room, I did turn on the fans and try to lower the temperature, and I've now turned them all off. So if people get too hot, we can turn them back on, but as you know, they're very loud. So I was trying to make it a little cool to start, and hopefully we don't need them on, but if we do, please speak right up and we can turn them back on. So our three panelists, I think we'll start with Istra Fuhrmann, and then we have Paula, Palmer, and Barb Adams, but Barb is the only one on the screen at the moment. So maybe we'll have Istra speak first, and then Barb, and then Paula, and then we'll welcome a conversation. Oh yeah, so that's a good idea. So why don't we have everyone introduce themselves briefly, and then Istra can start. But Istra, you want to introduce yourself first?
Let's see if this... Apologies for the noise. My name is Istra Fuhrmann. I am a resident of San Antonio, where I attend the San Antonio Friends meeting. I'll say I graduated from Swarthmore College, did the Quaker voluntary service in Atlanta, starting in 2019. And then for the past 2 years, I've been working with the Friends Committee on national legislation on issues including migration reform and nuclear weapons and nuclear disarmament. Glad to be here.
Okay, Barb, would you like to introduce yourself, and then Paula, and then we'll come back to Istra.
Sure. My name is Barb Adams, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. I live on the land of the Pamunkey, Nansemond, and Mattaponi, and I am in the James River and Chesapeake Bay watersheds. I am the Baltimore Yearly Meeting representative of QEW, and I work with a number of local grassroots organizations that are faced with fossil fuel and toxic pollution projects. And I'll stop there for now.
And I'm Paula Palmer. I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm a member of the Boulder, Colorado monthly meeting and Intermountain yearly meeting. And I live on the homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. I'm co-director of a program called Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples, which is a program of Friends Peace Teams. I am not Native myself, but my co-director, Geraldine Dakota, is Turtle Mountain Chippewa. So I think that's enough for now.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Istra, go ahead.
I'll start with this mic, and let me know if you all can't hear me. Is this volume okay? Yes, wonderful. Okay. So I wanted to actually open with a quote from an author and activist who's influenced my own thinking and my values and issues like love and community. And this is the author Bell Hooks, who recently passed away. And Bell Hooks writes, "Dominator culture has tried to keep us all afraid, to make us choose safety instead of risk, sameness instead of diversity. Moving through that fear, finding out what connects us, reveling in our differences, this is the process that brings us closer, that gives us a world of shared values, of meaningful community." And so I think about how my values have shaped me and how I've used activism as a way to move through some of the fear that exists in the world today. And when I reflect on this question and the theme of today's meeting, essentially how our faith has led and motivated us to work towards justice. My answer is reversed in some ways because, like many young people, I was drawn to Quaker work for justice before I ever actually considered identifying with the Quaker faith. And then through the process of working with the Quakers, I learned to more deeply root my activism in Quaker values, in Quaker spirituality, and have this sort of spiritual home and community that's able to sustain and support the work that I've done. So I wanted to share a story, first of all, speaking about how I began working with the Quakers, including some of the support I received, as well as some of the obstacles I've experienced. And then if I have time, I'll share more about my current work with nuclear testing survivors and some of the same answers and reflections to this question. So I grew up in Denton, Texas, where I had never met a real life Quaker. And it wasn't until I went to Swarthmore College that I began to first kind of be exposed, not to make Quakerism sound like an illness, but that was the first time I was really influenced or had any idea what Quakerism was. And at Swarthmore, when I was going through difficult times in my life, such as the passing of a friend at college, I found the Quaker practice of silent worship, speaking as you feel led out of the silence, very comforting to me when I was in these times. And it was also at Swarthmore College that I was able to take a course inside Chester State Prison. And my professor brought us Swarthmore students into the prison, and we sat and learned alongside incarcerated men in Philadelphia about the politics of prisons and punishment. And it was there that I was able to directly see how our society is set up to essentially discard predominantly Black and brown lives, to keep people down and hidden away from our society. And after this experience, I was led to do a Quaker year of service. And I traveled to Atlanta and joined the Quaker Voluntary Service, where I was working in Georgia prisons with women who had survived domestic violence. So I knew that as Quakers, we have a long and shameful history with mass incarceration, such as inventing solitary confinement, running the deadly prison Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. And I think that we're still grappling with that long history today. And many of us, myself included, have felt called to speak out against migrant detention and mass incarceration. Now, during my service year with QVS, I worked with the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence and organized advocates from around the state to join me on prison interviewing visits. And essentially I was providing post-conviction release services by creating parole packets for the women who I spoke with. And for many of these women who I met in Georgia's prisons, it was the first time that they had ever been able to tell their story of the domestic violence that they'd been through. And so to me, this felt like part of the Quaker value of bearing witness, of being there and hearing voices that, as I mentioned before, our society does try to keep down and keep hidden. It was also during this work that I learned about the prison to deportation pipeline for immigrants and how the very survival strategies of many domestic abuse victims have been criminalized. So as you probably can imagine, or perhaps you know from firsthand experience, I know we have people who have done work in prisons here. This is often very rewarding work with the relationships that we're able to form, but it can also be very heavy, very discouraging when we're not able to do anything, not able to actually help somebody who we meet and connect with inside. And so through this, I wanted to speak a little about how the Atlanta Friends meeting, which is a wonderful group of people, how they supported me and sustained me in this time. So local Quakers, when I was at QVS, would often cook us great meals. They would give us rides to and from the airport to allow us to travel home to see our families. I should clarify that I was living in a house with 7 other young people who were all doing socially active work with local nonprofits around the city of Atlanta. And we were under the care and ministry of the Atlanta Friends meeting. The Atlanta Friends meeting would also stock our pantry when we moved in. They would loan us a bike for people who were commuting to and from work that way. And they played a very active and very direct role in our life allowing us to perform that activism work that we were doing that year. At the same time, there was no expectation that we would, convert to Quakerism for those of us who were not raised Quaker, but there was space held for us to explore our spirituality, re-navigate our own relationships with religion, and experience the practices of silent worship and joining the Atlanta Friends meeting for their own practices. One other practice that I appreciated was that Quaker Voluntary Service assigns fellows what's known as a spiritual mentor or spiritual nurturer. And that's someone from the local Friends meeting who will meet with a young person, provide queries potentially to reflect. And I was assigned a spiritual nurturer who, like me, had left her previous religion because she couldn't reconcile it with her own values and her own identities. And so she'd left her religion because of homophobia, and she was able to help me re-navigate my own damaged relationship with religion and with spirituality and come to a much healthier place where I was able to embrace religion and spirituality once again. I also saw the Atlanta Friends meeting really live into their values. So for example, when the meeting was closed for 2 years during COVID, they actually opened the space to house refugees and provide shelter while people were waiting to find a more permanent accommodations. So I guess I wanted to talk just briefly about a couple of the challenges that I experienced that year. As you can imagine, having the pandemic happen in the middle of my QBS year did provide challenges. The prisons were shut down, so I wasn't actually able to continue my job in the same way that it had existed before. And that was a whole process of essentially, just like all Quaker meetings we're doing across the country, re-navigating how we wanted to exist in that space, how we could still connect with people, still bear witness, and still be able to uplift voices so that people who had experienced domestic violence were able to be heard by the parole board and eventually secure release. I also ran into some challenges where even if I was able to make change and help, for example, secure a mother's release from prison, she would still run into barriers when it came to finding jobs, finding housing, finding communities, because those post-release systems are not really in place to support people during re-entry. And so I realized there was a limit to how much I as one person could do, and that was partly how it was really helpful to lean on the Quakers who, in some cases, had been doing this work for 40 years. That also prompted my shift into the work that I'm currently doing, and I'll share, if there's time, more about a nationwide advocacy work to kind of address some of these systemic structures of oppression that aren't able to be broken into just as one person doing direct service work. So I'm happy to tell that story kind of later about my current work and let other panelists speak first, or I can do that now.
No, why don't you do that now? That would be
All right. So currently I wanted to speak a little bit about the work that I feel called to do at this time, which is supporting compensation for nuclear testing survivors here in the southwestern United States and in places such as Guam. So I've been working with the organization Friends Committee on National Legislation for almost 2 years. And for the past year, I've been part of the nuclear disarmament program. We actually have never had a focus at FCNL before on the human cost of nuclear testing here in the United States, despite the fact that the US has tested 1,000 nuclear weapons on its own soil, and people are still living and dying from the repercussions of that. So I was able to join that work and really start that work for FCNL. And I met a woman in my congressional district in Texas who had lost 13 family members to cancer because of the Trinity test in New Mexico, the world's very first atomic bomb test. And when I spoke with her for about an hour and began joining her on lobby visits and organizing other lobby visits for other downwinders I was connected with, I realized this is the work that I'm being called to do. This is my place, and this is where I need to be in this movement. And the Friends Committee on National Legislation actually wanted me to come back to DC. But as I mentioned, I felt like my place was here, and they ultimately agreed. So I was able to continue doing that work in the Southwest US, partnering with predominantly Native and Hispanic frontline communities who are dying now from radiation-related sicknesses. Even better, I was directly supported by a Quaker constituent named Lon Burnham. I'm not sure if he's in the room right now, but I believe he will be here. So I was able to be connected with this FCNL constituent with decades of experience and passion on nuclear weapons issues. Lon and I wrote an op-ed together on why Texas legislators need to pay attention to nuclear testing survivors and provide restitution to people who've been waiting as long as 77 years for justice and just for acknowledgement even. We also had meetings with local Quakers in places like El Paso. And one of these meetings I organized when we spoke with Congresswoman Escobar in El Paso, their staff said that they had never heard from constituents about this issue ever before until the Quakers came together to speak about that. So our op-ed along with that meeting really caught the attention of El Paso's Congresswoman, Veronica Escobar. She shared our article on her Twitter page, along with a public statement committing for the very first time to support compensation for nuclear testing and to make sure that Texas downwinders are included in that legislation. Afterward, with the continued support of Quakers who submitted over 3,000 letters from across the country for compensation for nuclear testing survivors, we're really getting to districts that maybe aren't actually directly impacted by nuclear weapons, maybe don't have constituents who are dying of radiation-related illnesses in their districts. But because we have this network of Quakers who care about these issues and care about ridding the world of these horrific weapons, we're able to still make our voices heard and speak from that place where our values are informing our activism. So as a newcomer to the nuclear disarmament space, I so value the voices of Quakers who have been steady, long-time opponents of these potentially world-ending weapons. And I think that when I and when you all speak from your moral values, we're able to cut through that really inaccessible, wonky language that's used on the Hill too often. And we can just ask simple questions like, in what situation would it make Americans safer to start a nuclear war when it comes to how we're handling situations like Ukraine and keeping the first use of nuclear weapons policy. Even through the COVID challenge, we've been able to use that as an opportunity, and I've been able to bring people in places like Guam, where I've worked with the president of the Pacific Association of Radiation Survivors, navigated time zones, and been able to bring him on my lobby visits as well, to really turn challenges into opportunities, uplift the stories of people who have actually survived atomic bombings, and show our legislators why we need to make sure these weapons are never used again. I'm happy to talk more at a later point about some of the other challenges and support I've received, but I'm very thankful for all of the Quaker activism that I've been able to follow in the lead with nuclear weapons, all of the people who have supported through letter writing and constituent advocacy, the amazing change that we're seeing right now when it comes to pushing this compensation fight forward. And of course, very grateful to be hosted by South Central Yearly Meeting here today and be able to share some of this work that I've been able to do thanks to different Quaker organizations' support. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's hear from our next panelist. Barb, would you like to go ahead? Except you're like, you need to take yourself off mute, my friend. It's the famous thing that happened.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Sorry. Well, yes, and I'm just in awe of Istra. Just thank you so much. It was really inspirational to hear all that you had to share in story. And I'm honored to be here. Thank you for this invitation. And also to be with one of my teachers and mentors, Paula Palmer. So this is a great honor in many ways. I too, like Istra, wanted to share some earlier kind of roots of issues that brought me to, that kind of started my investigation about justice and injustice. One of them, and they were all from when I was a teenager, when I was in high school mostly. And the first one was in my Lutheran church when I went and spoke to our board of directors, our board of deacons, asking our church, which is very well endowed and empty most of the time, except for certain nights and all day Sunday, if we would allow a local daycare center of mostly Black and low wealth community members to use our space. It was at that point that I realized that Quakers have some, or that some religions don't have a real social justice focus. And it really was one of the first things that really prompted me to think about religions and religious groups outside of my origins, to find meaning in social justice and collaboration with spiritual values. As a teen, I also joined a movement that was sponsored by Cultural Survival, which is still ongoing. And they were working to protect indigenous peoples and lands in the Amazon rainforest. And mostly this was a writing campaign. And so as a teenager, I was writing letters to US and mostly Brazilian elected officials, trying to get them to change their presence in the region, and also to see the importance of protecting indigenous people and their lands. This opened my eyes really to understanding the dangerous and life-threatening nature of injustice, and seeing and learning how people, especially outside the US, often were treated, but also our own American citizens who were less privileged to be treated. The third was when I was asked to join a group in high school that was called Project Involved, that was led by Peace Corps volunteers, really to help, and a Black Baptist church in the Washington, D.C. area, to really help young people understand and learn the skills and what it means to be a community organizer for social change, and to work against racism and classism in our communities. So many people that were a part of these three projects and these experiences, and also the people that weren't, and the messages I heard and the messages I didn't heard, really helped form my early beginnings and understanding of doing this, any kind of work. But I will talk about Quakerism, which I came to about 35 years ago. And it was a real gift for me to understand that there's a possibility of listening directly to God and listening for messages out of the silence and worship. And I have tweaked that to look at asking for messages into the silence. So listening for messages has been a big part, and is still a big part of how I follow, where I get my messages or leanings to work on justice work. I'll tell you the story that was really pivotal for me. I woke up one morning, just sat upright in bed because I had heard this message, and it was really a voice saying, "It's time." And not wanting to just accept that, I said, okay, well, time for what? And I didn't get an answer to that, but I said, okay, well, if it's time, then you have to show me what it's time for. So, because I am kind of a little smart aleck that way. So when I said that a number of times, it's like, okay, what is it time for? Show me. Not long after that, like within 2 weeks of that, I went to a young friends conference that I was helping with. And there was a representative from the Baltimore Yearly Meeting Unity with Nature Committee talking about climate change to all the young folks there. And I went up and talked to this person. I said, oh, this sounds really interesting. How can I be helpful? And he said, well, would you like to be an alternate representative Quaker Earth Care witness? And I said, oh, what's that? But then I said, yes, right after that. And this is part of, I guess, what leadings can do. I said yes because I had asked for something, show me the way. And I became an alternate at first, but now have been part of, and now I'm the rep from Baltimore Yearly Meeting to Quaker Earth Care Witness. And in that process have learned, it says, open up so many doors to greater understanding, to really hearing stories and messages about issues around the nation, around our continent, Turtle Island, around the globe, around issues of environmental justice, injustice, climate change, how it's affecting the most vulnerable populations in all of the places that we can identify. So that leading has been, has opened so many doors for me, and I'm really grateful. And in QEW, I am on the UN working group, which has enabled me to attend the the UN Forum on Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where I've been as an ally and basically a listener, hearing about global issues around, of so many people, Indigenous issues of people around the world, and how they are struggling and working valiantly to protect their land, air, and water, and their cultures and languages. Through those gifts, it has really prompted me to reach out more to understand and be an ally and advocate for Indigenous people and women's groups in my local area, but also in the US. And that prompted me to take the training and being a co-facilitator of Paula's Roots of Injustice, Seeds of Change program and Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples. And in opening doors, just this morning I was on a planning meeting because an Indigenous group near me has asked me to co-facilitate a training for Mothers Out Front, one of the organizations that I participate with, on understanding how to be an ally with Indigenous people. So this opening, this asking for the way to open has been one of the ways that Quakerism, my faith, has played a lot in my social justice work. The discernment of these things has been a real challenge for me, and mostly what has my conversation with myself has been, am I willing to put aside my ego and see what I am called to do? I think Quakers and myself, it's like I have a back and forth nature of like, well, who do I think I am to be doing this work? What do I have to offer? But also feeling like somehow it is important. I am really moved to be part of this. And the ability to have a sense of that there is a place for everyone to be doing any of the work that we are called to do. That is what has given me sort of the ability to discern, maybe this is not, there's other work that's not meant for me, and then there's work that I'm called to do. And it's like walking up to a door and seeing if that door opens. And if the door opens, walking through it and feeling like I may not know, there is maybe not a process of understanding before I go there, but that I may not know what it is. But once I'm there, to be able to put aside my own thinking about it and hear for what messages of what I have to do or what I'm called to do. I'll explain an experience that happened to me when I first went to the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And when I walked onto the UN property, and for those of you that have been there, you walk through this gate area in this beautiful courtyard, and I just stood and I said, what in the world am I doing here? I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing here. I mean, of course I had thoughts, right? But it's just being there in the presence of this group of people, over 1,000 representatives of Indigenous peoples all over the world. Very presumptuous, right? Who am I? So, but I walked in, got the courage to walk in and feeling like, okay, the door opened, I got to walk in the door. So literally. And then I found myself in rooms with people and knowing that I just am there as a listener and being very humble and trying to learn. I spoke to a number of young people who were part of the Navajo tribe, and we had a great conversation, and they really helped me to feel welcome. But later on, I met this young woman's father in a big auditorium where this is all the folks, the Indigenous people had come together. And I introduced myself. I said, I met your daughter earlier. And the first thing he said was, what tribe are you with, or what peoples are you with? And I said, well, I'm with the Quaker Earth Care Witness, and I am not an Indigenous person. And he said, you have no place here. I was like, aha. And I said, Yeah, I can understand how you might feel that way. And I wonder that too, but I'm here to learn and I'm here to humbly be in your presence. And that enables the conversation to continue. And at first it was difficult. He said, your people killed my people. I said, yes, we did. And I am so sorry for that. There's not much I can do, but be humble and listen to, if there's anything you'd like to tell me about that, I would be honored to hear that. So we walked through this process, and what I was so impressed with is that he stayed. He could have walked away, he could have, so many things that could have happened, but we continued to talk. And eventually it was this really, I was shaking with fear, but also shaking with some sense that there was a rightness to this conversation and that I had a place there. Ultimately, we talked about what it was like to be a parent in a challenging time. And because I too have concerns about my own children. And it led to more conversations about how we can be supporting each other. So this is, I guess, this sense that being led is not comfortable necessarily. It's not easy. And it is putting aside a sense of ego and just trying to be faithful to what that door is and what that opening is. The other work I do mostly is in communities around the state, fighting fossil fuel and toxic polluting projects. And in that too, I felt that leading is part of the process for me. Because there's so much to do. There's so many communities to be a part of. So I was asked if I would help to coordinate a group of volunteers to go to a community about an hour from where I live, who's facing a gas-fired electric plant, one of the biggest in the state, it would be. And I said, sure. And saying yes to things, sure I did. I showed up at the place where we were all supposed to be that someone else had coordinated. I showed up and I was the only person there. And I said, oh, okay, well, should I do this? Should I go ahead? It was canvassing and doing a petition. So my message was, yes, you will learn. Okay, all right. So I did. And I went and I canvassed 60 homes and I got 59 signatures to my petition. Lots of incredible conversations. And the biggest things I learned were that about this community, that it was a community that really cares about their land and water. It's very rural, it's very low wealth, except for plantation owners. We're in Virginia, so that still is a thing. And that people very much care about their neighbors, that most people, the people closest to the site of this project are Black, and no one knew about this project. So there's a problem. So just being able to do this process, I learned so much more than had I read about it in the newspaper and it really helped start. Then I was able to take some of the names of people who had answered the call to this petition, and with other folks that were also organizing, we had a meeting at the library, and then this organization was formed, a grassroots organization that I am still with today, and we're 3.5 years later. And the people in the community that have come into this space have shown me what it's really like to work to fight for justice, to protect land, water, and air. And their aquifer is challenged by these projects, and I can tell you the outcome later. So this discernment process and this hearing messages has been vital. The other aspect of Quakerism that has been really important to me is not so much the book, although the book is wonderful, and by Parker Palmer, which is Let Your Life Speak. But the title of that book really haunts me in a really good way. It's like, what is my life saying to myself? What am I saying to myself by my choices? And what am I saying to others? And that means a lot to me in a way because I've talked to my daughters about climate change, and they are really proud of me. But also they really recognize that the reason I'm doing this work is partly because of them. And now I have a new granddaughter. So my life is speaking in a way to show that I'm doing all that I can, as much as I can, as led to really try to help protect around justice and environmental justice, but also to find out how we can be supporting each other in addressing climate change and climate crisis. I think I'll stop there. But it would not have been possible without the support in all of these arenas, support with really thoughtful, well-meaning, certainly intelligent, but it's more the heart of folks who I've been able to walk with and walk alongside of and be an ally to, that have taught me so much. And I'm grateful beyond words for just this ability to share space and time with folks that have really meant a lot to me. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you so much, Barb. Now, Paula, we'd love to hear from you, and then we'll have time for comments and questions.
Thank you, Liz. I feel like I need to take a few breaths. There's just so much to take in from what Istra and Barb have shared with us. Thank you, Istra and Barb. So I have experienced what I think of as two very significant leadings in my life. The first one happened before I was a Quaker. It happened when I was 24 years old, and it started with the re-election of Richard Nixon in 1972. I've often said the first Quaker who had a big influence on my life was Richard Nixon, because when he was reelected in 1972, I decided to leave the country. And I was led to do that because I had been in college and afterwards a very committed activist in the anti-war movement and also in the civil rights movement. And I felt that the re-election of Richard Nixon by 49 out of the 50 states in that year, when we think things are getting worse, we can always go back to 1972 and remember just how bad they were then. That meant to me the continuation of the war in Vietnam, and what I was led to do was to work my way to Costa Rica, where I had learned the country had abolished the army. And I thought, what I need to do is to learn how to live in a society that was non-militarized, that was consciously non-militarized, demilitarized. I didn't know what it would be like. I didn't know how people live in such a society. So I worked my way eventually to Costa Rica, and there I gravitated toward living with Indigenous people on the Caribbean side of the country. And so that is where I first had an opportunity to learn directly from Indigenous people. And they also learned about me, and one of the things that they learned was that I was a writer, and they asked me if I would help them write about their experience as a people. So over the 20 years that I ended up living in this tiny village in a rainforest community of of Costa Rica, we published 5 books of people's history, oral history, that was really the indigenous people and also the Afro-Caribbean people who, people of African descent who live on that coast. I worked with both of those communities and helped them write and publish their own testament to what they think is valuable about themselves as unique peoples, and what their aspirations are as unique peoples. So I was oriented there toward learning from and listening to Indigenous people and offering what I can. I often thought, well, if they had needed somebody to plant tomatoes, I would not have stayed because I did not have that skill. But I did have one skill that could serve. And so I was able to respond in that way. And then I came back to the United States, and I won't tell you all of what I did, but I was able to find work that supported Indigenous people in this country, and that gave me opportunities to learn directly from Indigenous people as I worked for Indigenous organizations. Then when I came back to the United States, I had been influenced by the Quakers in Monteverde, whom I loved and whom I cherish to this day. I lived very far from them, and so I wasn't able to really become a Quaker in Costa Rica, but their influence meant that when I came back to the United States, I came back to Boulder, where I had grown up. The one thing that I knew that I would do when I came back to the United States was to see what it would be like to be a Quaker. So that was 1993. And so my growth as a Quaker really started then, and my work with Indigenous people in this country started then. I was working for an organization called Global Response about 10 years ago. We were organizing, responding to requests from Indigenous people all around the world who were dealing with environmental threats in this country and in other countries. And at their request, we were developing international campaigns to support them in whatever their aspirations were. Sometimes it was to shut down a mine that was polluting their land, or sometimes it was just getting a seat at the table, a way to talk to the government to defend their rights and to promote the kinds of, quote, development that responded to their needs and their values as Indigenous people. So anyway, I was working in that organization, and that took me to the same place that Barb mentioned a little bit ago, the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where Indigenous people from all around the world gather every spring in New York at the UN headquarters. And they, as Barb said, they share the challenges that they are experiencing in every possible ecosystem around the country, the challenges that they face environmentally and socially and culturally and in terms of education and defending their rights and finding ways for their communities to thrive. So it's thrilling to, as Barb said, it's thrilling to be able to hear them and learn from them. And in 2011, I heard them for the first time talk about the Doctrine of Discovery. I had not heard that term at that point. It was becoming a term that was used by Indigenous people to talk about the ongoing impacts of genocide and colonization colonization of so many parts of the world by the European powers. And what I heard them say was that none of the programs that were designed to benefit Indigenous people were going to work. They were only just going to be Band-Aids unless we really understood the impacts of the Doctrine of Discovery. Unless we learned what the root causes of the situations that Indigenous people today find themselves in, and the continuing discrimination against them. We just weren't going to get anywhere unless we dug deep into this history and understood its sources, and understood how it's not only impacting Indigenous people, but how it's impacting white people, how it's impacting those of us who have inherited these ideas of white supremacy and privilege that come to those of us who are white primarily. They come to us just by living in the world that we live in. They come to us not at our own bidding, but they influence our thinking and our interactions with peoples of color, and in this case specifically with Indigenous peoples. So what the Indigenous people were asking for at the UN in 2011 was specifically for Christians, for the Christian churches to learn about the Doctrine of Discovery and to look at our own history as denominations, and also our own situations and behaviors and relationships today through the lens of the Doctrine of Discovery. Well, I heard that call with my Quaker ears. I was not there as a Quaker, but I heard that as a Quaker, and this was the first nudge I had to the second major leading that has influenced my life for the past decade. I came back to the Boulder meeting where, fortunately, we have an Indigenous Peoples Concerns Committee, which had been started right about the time that I came to Boulder, about 1993, I think. And I had become a member of that group. So we had a small group of people within the meeting who had been collaborating to the extent that that was possible for them to collaborate with Indigenous people. And so I came back to that committee and I told them what I had heard at the United Nations about the Doctrine of Discovery. And we started a study group. And we invited professors from the University of Colorado, Indigenous professors, to meet with us and to help us learn about the Doctrine of Discovery. And as we did that, this sense grew in me that I needed to find ways of bringing that, not only that knowledge, but that concern to the meeting as a whole, to the Boulder meeting as a whole. And then I imagined that I might be able to take that into the Intermountain Yearly meeting. So I began working with some Indigenous educators to create a workshop to be able to carry this forward. And at the beginning of 2013, we pilot tested that with groups of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And it developed over time into the workshop that we are currently doing now, as the one that Barb mentioned, which is called Roots of Injustice, Seeds of Change Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples. As it became clear that this was a useful tool, and that Native people joined me in presenting it, I realized that I needed to dedicate myself full-time to doing this work. And so I went to the clerk of the meeting, whose name was Steve Clark, and I told him that I felt that this is what I needed to do. In the meantime, the Boulder meeting had approved a minute renouncing the Doctrine of Discovery. We took that minute also to Intermountain Yearly meeting, and they also approved a minute denouncing the Doctrine of Discovery and supporting the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so the Boulder meeting clerk helped me set up a clearness committee, and the clearness committee wrote a recommendation to the Boulder meeting to recognize this ministry as my ministry. And the meeting created a spiritual care committee, which is really the greatest gift I've ever received from my meeting. This spiritual care committee has met with me about once a month for almost a decade now. And the meeting also created an oversight committee and a fund that people could contribute to so that I could be supported in doing this work. And they approved a travel minute so that I could travel in this ministry. And so the project grew and involved more and more Indigenous people and also non-Indigenous people. And it expanded into areas that I hadn't contemplated. I began doing research on the role that Quakers played as they operated Indigenous boarding schools, for example. And eventually it became too big for the Boulder meeting, and I was able to find a place within Friends Peace Teams to continue this work. So for me, although most of my work now is done with non-Quaker people, with Indigenous people and people from all different faiths and no faiths at all, I'm able to do this work as a Quaker within Quaker Peace, Friends Peace Teams, which is also a very great gift to me as a Quaker. I want to say on behalf of Friends Peace Teams that we welcome new ministries. And so if those of you who are listening today have the experience of nudges or leadings, Friends Peace Teams is one place where you can go. And so I invite you to do that. And I'll say that the next place that I'm feeling drawn to in this work is to explore myself and encourage other non-Native people to explore our own settler family stories, and to learn, if we don't know it, the ways that our family stories intersect with or overlap with the Indigenous experience on this land, and to see if that offers ways for us to connect with Indigenous people through our mutual experience of the land and love for the land where we live. So that's the direction that, a direction that I feel moved toward now. I want to say just one thing about it's not an obstacle, but it has been a challenge to me. And that is that it's hard to be the bearer of bad news. And I have had to be the bearer of bad news to Quakers. I have had to bring the bad news of the harm that Quakers did over probably about 150 years as we operated Indian boarding schools. And Yeah. So I know that there are people in my own meeting, and there are other friends who have found it hard to take this in. And there are those who have criticized me for I don't know, making them feel bad, I guess. It's not my intention to make anyone feel bad or to make Quakers feel guilty for actions that have been taken by Quakers over all of our history. But it is my intention to speak the truth and to ask us all to learn the truth and to ask us to build relationships with Indigenous people today based on the truth. It's the only way that we can really develop relationships based on respect, mutual respect, and justice. It has to start with truth-telling. And we, after all, as Quakers, are known as seekers of the truth, friends of the truth. And so this, I believe, needs to be something that we understand ourselves to be called to. But I am only saying that that this is a challenge. It's a challenging thing for those of us who are working in this area.
Thank you so much, Paula. And I want to appreciate the deep listening that I heard in all three of these stories, of really listening to people that we come in contact with and listening to people that, I'm going to sort of quote air quotes, that might seem other, but really doing that listening to see how that informs their leading. So I want to appreciate all three of our speakers for that deep listening. And now we will come to the portion where if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, if you want to make a comment online, please put it in the chat. And if you're here in the room, Neil will be happy to bring you a microphone.
And Paula, it's Kathleen Gundy from Fayetteville, Arkansas. I'd like to say that out of my bad feelings came tons of inspiration. So I've been very inspired. Thank you. By other speakers too, but particularly Paula.
Well, as the moderator here, I'd love to just put this to all three of you. Are there, I heard some about this, but are there ways that you feel like your local meetings or other Quaker bodies could support this work of yours better, or support individuals better on these paths? Or there are other things you want to uplift as things that would be really useful? I know, Paula, you had spoken some about some committees that have been supporting you and some spiritual work, but I'd love to hear more about that if people want to speak to that. It's hard because we can't eyeball each other to see who's going to speak first, but we'll manage. You're waving, good.
Yeah. I just wanted to, well, I have a couple of things to say. I wanted to just take the opportunity, because I didn't really talk about future work, and I wanted to say that, but then I also speak about support. So in Quaker Earth Care Witness, my early work with the Peace Corps workers talked about direct social change and taking action, mostly from the civil rights movement. And that has reappeared in the work through Quaker Earth Care Witness. And not long ago, we started a working group called the Direct Action Working Group. and are working on seeing how Quaker Earth Care Witness can be a force within the Quaker world and outside and beyond the Quaker world to really bring direct action, spirit-led direct action in places that are requiring a voice speaking to truth. So if anyone feels led, we would love to hear from you about issues that are going on in your community and ways that we might, Quaker Earth Care Witness and the Direct Action Working Group might be able to be of support to you. But also we are working with Equate and Eileen Flanagan, who I think you've heard from this time, on the new Vanguard campaign. So we'll be collaborating with Equate and them on that. So this work on seeing how Quakers can really take the step and moving into direct action around the world and in our locales, making the connection between what's happening globally and also locally is something that's really the work moving forward. Also, I was led to do some film as part of working with community groups, a film about an Atlantic Coast pipeline through a community in a very mountainous community in Virginia called Troubled Water Voices from Bath. It also led to making a film for Quaker Earth Care Witness. And now I'm working with a group of people, the Ramapo Lenape tribe in Western New Jersey, on documenting a lot of the issues that they're facing. And my community has also given me a travel minute and a support group, which has been incredibly helpful. So, but really the most important thing that I've received from my Quaker community is acknowledgement, is being heard and being recognized. Sometimes doing this work feels very, it has its own rewards, but it's also a bit lonely. And for my meeting to really acknowledge that I'm doing spirit-led work has meant a lot to me. And that a lot of my own self-doubt is what I really I'm challenged with, and the feeling that somehow I'm not sure that I'm up to the challenge of how to follow this work. So being able to feel that other folks have faith in me, in my faithful work, has been really important. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
I want to talk about money. This is always a hard thing to talk about among friends. It was, I think, very difficult for me to ask for money from my own meeting, and I think there were a lot of different opinions among members of my own meeting about whether it's appropriate, whether it's Quakerly to support ministries with to offer financial support to friends who are called to ministry. People in other denominations don't seem to have that problem as much as I have experienced it among friends. And so I'm only saying that this can be an obstacle to Quakers who experience leadings. I hope that friends will become more generous in supporting especially young people who experience leadings. You know, back in the old days, meetings would support traveling ministers by taking care of their cows and chickens and their children, not to lump all of those together, but nevertheless, this was how friends supported ministers who traveled to other meetings or in carrying out their ministries. Today, a few of us have those needs, but we do have to live. And so I would like friends to consider how we can be more welcoming and supportive financially as well as spiritually of young people who want to serve.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate what Paula said, and speaking from a young adult perspective, I just wanted to pick up on a piece of that, which I think is that for young people, it's difficult not only to ask for money, but really to ask for any support at all. I think often young people may not realize all of the different resources and support systems that we have access to. And for people like me who are maybe finding myself in a new city like Atlanta or like San Antonio, it's hard to believe that we have a community, a faith community here who don't even really know us, but still care about us and the work that we're doing. So for me, it was really, really helpful to have offers of support verbally extended to me again and again, just like encouraging me to really take people up on their support, because I don't think I could have really asked for that and followed up on that on my own. And a couple of other thoughts. First of all, I did not really get to speak about my year organizing on immigration reform with the support of the San Antonio Friends, but their support was so wonderful, so instrumental. I could talk for another 10 minutes about that and about all of the amazing Quakers from my city who joined me to share their experiences running an immigration law clinic or sponsoring refugees from El Salvador in the 1980s, just people who educated me and really shared their knowledge with me in a way that I'm very grateful for. And then finally on this question of like how local meetings can support would-be young advocates, I think a couple of the best ways, the first one I'll mention is modeling that activism in the world, creating an environment where young adults want to join you and want to join that work you're doing. I remember I was inspired by Quakers in Atlanta, like SCYM, to name one person who kind of got me into FCNL and had really helped start the movement against gender-based violence in Atlanta some 40 years ago. And being able to sit down with her over a potluck lunch and hear her experiences really inspired me to continue doing similar work. So I think being that example for young people, and then making connections with young adults who don't have to be Quaker. Perhaps you're thinking, well, my local meeting doesn't really have any young adults who we can support. But you could always, for example, help my organization, FCNL, promote at your high school or at your college, potentially finance a young adult who wants to go to Spring Lobby Weekend or participate in one of the programs that we offer. And if you make them aware that there's funding available to do something like this, and that they have this opportunity to make political change on the topics that they care about, that can be the start to building that relationship between that young person who maybe doesn't know anything about Quakers, but now has a reason to be in touch with your meeting and to build that relationship. Just a few thoughts for now.
Thank you, Istra. And I saw Larry, were you trying to ask something?
Yes.
Oh. Then we have something in the chat, so we'll come to that next.
So Ishta, I wonder if you would tell us, or if you've already said it, tell us again, the response you've gotten from legislators in your lobbying efforts.
And do you mean on the nuclear testing issue? Yeah, you know, it's been an issue that has been moving forward, and that's something that I really cannot say about a lot of the work I do on nuclear weapons and Pentagon spending and reining that in. So I've had a wonderful response, honestly. I think a barrier is just that a lot of people don't know about nuclear testing in the United States, the fact that a program exists called RECA, or the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, and that compensation exists, but people will be losing it soon if Congress does not act. And so I think being able to bring people to share their stories as atomic cleanup veterans who now are dying of cancer, or downwinders, civilians who were exposed to unsafe radiation when America tested nuclear weapons, in some cases only about 12 miles away from populated areas. You know, Congress members don't always know about this, and when they're able to hear from somebody who was directly impacted, I think it's an issue that can really unite people, because of course, nuclear fallout doesn't respect whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or in the rural or urban atmosphere. It affects everybody. So that's something that we've really gotten a good response for. And to kind of be a little more specific at addressing your question, the policy we're lobbying for has gotten a lot of bipartisan support and was marked up in the House. So it's ready for a full House vote and got a lot of support from both parties. And that's something we're just trying to build momentum and get especially more Texans on board.
Thank you. And then Scott's going to read something out of the chat. And if anyone has maybe one or two last questions after that.
I got a question online to Paula or Barb. It says, glad to hear QEW, Quaker Earth Care Witness, is still thriving. We used to participate when we could travel. Good talk regarding putting ego aside. Do you know Professor Kyle White, University of Michigan, Native American advocate and one of the members of the White House Advisory Council on Environmental Justice? And this person wrote a book, the International Casebook in Construction Ethics, which deals with Native American lands and experiences, and says that we who are working on environmental justice need support, even if we're not Native ourselves. I rejoice at your success.
I think one of the great things that has happened in environmental justice work lately are the protests, for example, at Line 3 in northern Minnesota, where Native people have led those movements and continue to lead and will continue to lead environmental justice movements. But they welcome the participation and the support of non-Native people, and Quakers, some of you who are here today, participated in the Line 3 protests. And so I think that ways that non-Native people can show up and support Indigenous leadership in these movements is a really valuable way for us to learn and accomplish some important goals.
And I just want to add to that Quaker Earth Care Witness did have a presence. Shelley Tenenbaum, who's here today, was an attender and part of QEW's delegation to the Enbridge Line 3 work this summer, as well as Andrea Bean. And Andrea Bean's in the room, so if she will wave her hand. Andrea Bean is the yearly meeting rep to Quaker Earth Care Witness from your yearly meeting. So I would say that Quaker Earth Care Witness does have, and I think will continue to grow in our collaboration with Indigenous peoples and projects. And it feels very important for, again, connecting the dots, because we all, in whatever communities we are part of, need to be reaching out and collaborating to really bring about the kind of change that has to happen for social justice, environmental justice, and protecting our lands. So please talk to Andrea while you're there, and we'd love to have people reach out to Quaker Earth Care Witness to see how we can collaborate in the future.
I don't see anyone burning with a question. It's 4 o'clock, and I want to respect that there's another workshop here at 4:15. I want to thank Istra, Paula, and Barb for sharing their stories and their spiritual listening with us and challenging us to continue to reach out. Maybe we could just have a minute or two of silence, and then people can go on to wherever they're going.